The old man's hand was shaking so badly that he nearly dropped the last box, and what happened next changed the direction of my life forever. I had only stopped to help an elderly couple move into their new home, expecting nothing in return. I didn't know that behind their tired smiles was a story of loneliness, sacrifice, and a daughter who had spent years believing she had no reason to come back. And I certainly didn't expect that, when she finally arrived, the first thing she would ask me was, "Are you single?" But that question was only the beginning of something none of us could have imagined. Before we continue, if you believe people deserve second chances, and that one small act of kindness can change a life, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Bright Acts for more second chance stories. Your support helps these stories reach people who may need them more than we realize. My name is Daniel, and at 34, I had become very comfortable with an uncomfortable kind of loneliness. I worked as a maintenance technician, fixing broken appliances, repairing old houses, and doing whatever jobs people were willing to pay me for. I had once been engaged, but the relationship had ended after my fiancée chose a different life with someone who could offer her more money and certainty. I told everyone I was fine. The truth was that I had stopped expecting anyone to choose me. My small apartment was clean, quiet, and almost painfully empty. One Saturday morning, I was driving home when I noticed an elderly couple struggling beside a moving truck. The husband was trying to lift a large box while his wife stood nearby, clearly exhausted. They had hired movers, but two workers had apparently left early after a disagreement with the company. The couple still had dozens of boxes sitting inside the truck. I pulled over without thinking. The old man looked surprised when I offered to help. His name was Arthur, and his wife was Margaret. They were both in their 70s and had spent nearly 40 years in the same house. They were moving into a smaller place because the stairs in their old home had become too difficult for Margaret, while Arthur had recently begun struggling with his back. Their new house was modest but beautiful, with a small porch, flower beds, and a backyard surrounded by old trees. For the next several hours, I carried boxes, furniture, lamps, books, dishes, and memories. Every box seemed to contain a piece of their life. Margaret would sometimes stop me and carefully explain where something belonged, while Arthur kept apologizing for making me work so hard. I kept telling them it was nothing. But the truth was, helping them felt strangely good. For once, I wasn't repairing something broken. I was helping two people begin again. As afternoon turned into evening, Arthur sat on the porch and watched me carry the final box inside. His eyes became unexpectedly emotional. He told me that he and Margaret had raised their only daughter in that old house. Her name was Emily. She had left home nearly 10 years earlier after a terrible argument with them. Arthur and Margaret had wanted her to stay nearby, but Emily had dreamed of building a career in another state. The argument had become worse than either side expected, and pride had done what anger often does. It built a wall between people who loved each other. Margaret had quietly kept every birthday card Emily ever sent. Arthur had never admitted it, but he still checked his phone every morning hoping to see her name. They had spoken occasionally over the years, but never enough to repair what had been broken. I could see the pain in their faces, so I didn't ask questions. Sometimes people don't need advice. Sometimes they simply need someone willing to sit beside their sadness without trying to erase it. Just as the sun began to disappear behind the trees, a dark car pulled into the driveway. A woman stepped out carrying a small suitcase. She looked to be in her early 30s, with long brown hair, tired eyes, and the kind of expression people wear when they have rehearsed a difficult moment 100 times but still don't know what to say. Margaret froze. Arthur stood slowly. Emily had come home. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Margaret rushed toward her daughter, and the suitcase fell onto the driveway. Mother and daughter embraced as though 10 years of distance had suddenly collapsed. Arthur stood behind them with tears running silently down his cheeks. I stepped away, believing this was a family moment that didn't belong to me. I started gathering the empty boxes, hoping to leave before anyone noticed how emotional I had become. But Emily turned toward me. She looked at the boxes, then at her parents, and finally at me. Her expression changed from confusion to gratitude. Margaret quickly explained that I was the stranger who had stopped to help them when their movers abandoned the job. Emily looked at me for a long moment before asking the question that would stay in my mind for years. "Are you single?" I actually laughed because I thought she was joking. She smiled nervously and explained that she wasn't asking because she wanted to make my life complicated. She simply wanted to know who the man was that had helped her parents when she couldn't even bring herself to come home. That question opened a conversation that lasted almost the entire evening. Emily admitted that she had wanted to visit many times but was ashamed. She had convinced herself that her parents didn't need her anymore. Meanwhile, Arthur and Margaret had convinced themselves that Emily had forgotten them. Three people had spent nearly a decade suffering from the same misunderstanding. I realized something that night. Sometimes families don't fall apart because they stop loving one another. Sometimes they fall apart because everyone is waiting for someone else to make the first move. The next morning, I returned to help Arthur install a handrail on the porch. Emily was still there. We talked while Margaret prepared breakfast. Emily told me about her career, her failed relationships, and the years she had spent pretending that success could fill the empty space left by her family. I told her about my own failed engagement and how I had learned to stop expecting people to stay. She looked at me and said something I hadn't heard in years. Maybe some people leave because they are not meant to stay. That doesn't mean the next person will. Her words stayed with me. Over the following weeks, I kept visiting the couple. At first, it was to repair little things around the house. Then it became dinner. Then Sunday afternoons. Emily began coming more often too. Slowly, the four of us became something that none of us had planned. One rainy evening, Margaret handed me an old photograph. It showed Arthur and her standing beside a much younger Emily. On the back, Margaret had written a sentence. "Home is wherever we choose to forgive." I couldn't stop thinking about it. Emily and I eventually began spending time together outside her parents' home. There was no dramatic romance, no instant fairy tale ending. There were awkward conversations, uncertainty, and moments when both of us pulled back because we were afraid of being hurt again. But something genuine was growing between us. Months later, Arthur's health took a sudden turn. He was hospitalized for several days, and Emily stayed beside him every night. Margaret sat in the waiting room holding her daughter's hand. I stayed too, even though nobody had asked me to. One morning, Arthur opened his eyes and saw all three of us beside him. He smiled weakly and said that he had spent years thinking the best days of his life were behind him. Then he looked at Emily and me and said that sometimes life doesn't give people what they expect. Sometimes it gives them something better after they think everything is already lost. Arthur recovered slowly. A year after I first stopped beside that moving truck, I stood on the same porch watching Emily plant flowers beside her mother. Arthur was sitting nearby, pretending not to supervise while giving instructions every few minutes. I smiled because I suddenly understood what had really happened that day. I thought I had stopped to help an elderly couple move. But they had actually helped me move too. They moved me out of loneliness and back into hope. They reminded me that family can be rebuilt, that forgiveness can arrive late and still be powerful, and that sometimes the smallest act of kindness opens a door you didn't even know existed. Emily never forgot the question she asked me that first evening. Years later, whenever she teased me about it, I told her that I had thought she was simply curious. She would smile and say that she had been curious about one thing, whether the man who helped her parents was available for a second chance. And somehow he was. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes in forgiveness, and subscribe to Bright Acts. You never know whose life might be changed by a simple story of kindness. And before you go, comment "second chances" if you believe that people deserve another opportunity to find love, family, and happiness, even after life has convinced them it is too late. Because sometimes the moment that changes your life doesn't arrive with a grand announcement. Sometimes it arrives as a moving truck, an old couple who needs help, and one simple question that you never expected to hear.